Chris at A to B here. So I've had some questions on the Cadillac. First of all the engine parts are off to the machine shop. I am waiting for them to measure everything up and give me a phone call to tell me what size pistons and bearings to order for it. But that's where we're at with all the mechanicals of the engine. But I have had some questions both in person and online that people have been surprised that a 76 Eldorado, a gigantic car, was front-wheel drive, and B, how the engine sat in there the way it did in the first video. Most people nowadays are used to the engine sitting sideways, transverse, in a front-wheel drive car. There are a few longitudinal mount front-wheel drive cars, but most front-wheel drive cars are transverse mount. Most people did not. I've run into a lot of people that did not realize GM made front-wheel drive cars. This 76 Eldorado, it's a design that debuted with the 1967 Oldsmobile Toronado, and then the Cadillac Eldorado was moved to this platform in 1968, and it continued in this size, I believe, until 1977, until this same design was downsized in 78 for the Buick Riviera and Cadillac Eldorado. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting setup. It's one of those because we could, not because we should type situations. So let's go take a look under the hood of this car without the engine in it, and I can show you how the transmission and differentials. Yes, did drive the Jeep here tonight. It's a nice night out here. See if I can get this hood open with one hand. So, how this is set up, the engine actually bolts in a traditional location to the bell housing back here, torque converter, just like we would normally see. But in the back side of this transmission is a great big link belt chain that runs down to over here, because the transmission section is right here and sits beside the left side of the engine block. What this transmission basically is, it is a turbo 400 that has been cut behind the front pump, basically. So we have the torque converter, input shaft, stator support shaft, front pump, and then the input gear and chain that runs the input chain. That's where that side of the transmission stops. The chain comes down here and then runs the gear train of the transmission. I've never had one of these transmissions apart. From my understanding, this transmission is very similar internally to a turbo 400. But some of the gear train the gears are actually cut with the helix the other direction to change its output direction. Then on the front side of the transmission, it is direct mounted to a differential. This differential's roughly I think a 10-bolt style rear end. They're front differentials, so it has an output shaft over here and a CV joint that goes out to the axles. And then there should be an axle right here, output shaft right in this area that connects to this CV shaft over here. This axle right here, output shaft, has to be removed to be able to get the engine out, because it passes real close to the oil pan, if you remember the weird cutout I showed you in the oil pan. So anyway, this is how they did it. Yes, these cars were front-wheel drive. They have torsion bar front suspension. At least this one used to have. It actually has air suspension, and you see the airbag buckets right here and right here. But these cars traditionally have torsion bar suspension. They're basically set up, this torsion bar front suspension stuff is set up a lot like the 88 to 98 Chevy pickup trucks. So when GM went to independent front suspension on the on the Chevy, on the GMT 400 body style in 1988, they didn't pull that front four-wheel drive suspension setup from out of nowhere. It started with the 67 Toronado. So we'll shut this hood down on this beast. And I think that's about all we got time for tonight. I just wanted to show everybody how that worked, and I'll post another update when I hear from the machine shop on what we're going to have to do. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe.